make sure I don't fall off into the bay. I would not like that. Hello. Hey, Richard. Terry, we met last year. Yes. Well, there's Steve. Hi, this is Terry with Terry's Doing It, and I'm with
Bonnie Hough.
Good to see you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
It's been a year now since the last book, and thank you for making place for us in your lovely houseboat.
Lovely. So glad to have you here.
Thank you. How is it to live on a houseboat?
It's pretty wonderful.
Yep.
Yeah. It's calm, and I love seeing the seals in my backyard, doing the dishes, or working at home. And in the springtime, I usually have a mama seal with her baby nursing right outside my window, and that's really wonderful.
Fun. Sea lions, do they inhabit the dock, and do you have to chase them off?
Sometimes, but they haven't been around that much.
What's it like when you have a storm?
We are actually pretty protected here, and it's a big houseboat. It's a big concrete hull, so we don't move around that much. I will say, though, that I generally go downstairs to the bedroom to avoid any. I have been known to be upstairs in the living room and go, I'm moving downstairs.
Yeah. Well, so how did you end up living in a houseboat? You haven't lived here, your whole life.
No. I lived in a house fairly close by, but a good half an hour to hour more of a commute, given traffic for my work. And my late husband had Parkinson's and was going to lose the ability to drive. And so we were looking around, and he sort of said, well, if I'm giving up the house, I want it to be because we're doing something cool, not because I have Parkinson's. So it worked out really well, and big challenge to go from a big 3-bedroom house and garage and everything into a houseboat. And we did all that, and it was amazing. And then he died 6 weeks later in a hiking accident, but he was happier than he'd ever been in his life.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It worked out really well.
So you were a successful attorney at the time. What was his profession?
He was a fundraiser. Oh. He started the foundation of the State Bar of California. Oh. And he loved raising money for kids' projects. That was his passion. But he liked to raise money. I like to give it away. So it all worked out.
That's pretty good. So your career has been mostly with the State Bar? Have you practiced privately?
I practiced privately. I started out in a small practice and then started a nonprofit organization that help low-income people with family law problems, divorce, domestic violence, those kinds of issues. And then was hired by the state of California to start a project to assist people with those on a statewide level. That's a big self-help project. And so I worked there for 25 years.
I worked for Legal Aid.
Oh, okay.
Redwood Legal Assistance, if you're familiar with them. Okay. And that was in 1982, about 1979 through 82. Okay. Yeah. So I'm very familiar with temporary restraining orders and crises of all different kinds. And so you liked practicing family law?
I did. I did.
It's you either like it or you love it, and not a lot of people love it. Why is that?
I think you have to really love people and their stories, because they're amazing stories that people have. But it can also be really exhausting. Yeah. So I only practiced with for probably 8 or 9 years. Well, I guess 10 years all told. And I loved it. And that was the part that was hardest, was not having that kind of people contact. But Instead, my clients wound up being the people in the courts that were setting up self-help programs, and doing some volunteering there and hearing stories and things like that. So yeah, but I think that's it. And it's an interesting combination, in my opinion, of social work and the law. True. Yeah, I thought the people were great.
Well, I'll tell you my best story from legal aid. Okay. So I'm the receptionist. I'm not, at that point, I'm not a legal secretary, but I'm fluent in Spanish. We were doing a divorce for a non-Hispanic woman, and she was previously married to a Hispanic man. I don't know if he was in the country legally or not. But she brought with her boyfriend. And she didn't seem nervous at all, but she had little pin pricks of red, little dots of red, which indicate that somebody's been without oxygen.
Right.
And I'm doing my work. I'm just working away. And I hear him say, he thought that she was there to deal with him. And I heard him say, "Tú te voy a matar. I'm going to kill you." And I kept, with my papers, because obviously you don't want to escalate things.
Right.
And then I just got up. I said, "I'll be back in a minute." I went in the other room and called the cops. The minute he saw the cops come, he ran off, and I don't know whatever happened to her, but that was my legal aid experience. And it's a highly volatile time for people. Yeah. Well, so at some point you moved into sort of an administrative capacity with the bar then? What did you do?
Well, it's always been with the court, but I have a degree in public administration as well as law. And so I was the executive director and attorney for my agency. So I've always done that. And so when I was hired by the state, I was working on a lot of education and rules and all kinds of things. And then gradually became responsible for funding different projects. And so it's always been, I have the parts of my career I've liked the best, or that combination of the law and then the administrative piece, trying to figure out how to help people get their programs set up, how to use volunteers, their staff, how to make sure, to work within a system. And
so you needed something, administrative law is very much dealing with regulations and rules and procedures and processes. But you married it with the helping side, which is pretty cool. Typically, the career path for an administrative lawyer is to work as a county counsel or something like that. Right. And the counties just are not warm, happy, fuzzy clients.
Right. Yeah. So this is the kind of thing we did the forms for domestic violence, all the forms for divorce. That was, which is incredibly interesting legal work, because you're trying to take what is it that somebody has to prove and put it in questions that people might actually be able to answer, so that was always super interesting. And the other thing that's fun about that process, working for the state and others, is there's a whole comment process where people are providing feedback and ideas. And even though sometimes it's challenging, and my team would get a little like, "Oh my God, do I have to write down every single comment?" Whatever. I was like, I always learned something. And we always, anytime people would comment, it was a better process. Because when you're working for a state the size of California, 39 million people, there are a lot of different ways to understand things or look at things.
So the forms that you produced were then disseminated out to every county clerk, and those were the forms that they had to use.
Yeah. If you get a divorce in California, you get to use my forms.
Oh, how fun! Well, so I think it's really interesting. First, a little background about us. We met in 2019.
I think so.
And we went with Don George, travel writer, editor, just a great human being, to San Francisco for the day. And why were you there? I know why I was there. Why were you there?
Well, I love to travel, and I am. I think I was thinking about how to combine that with writing to maybe able to do something where I could produce enough that I could at least call it a tax deduction, if nothing else.
Sure.
Not necessarily seeing it as a huge profession.
It's a shrinking.
It is a shrinking profession, as we have found. Yes, AI has impacted this field a lot too. But I think it's also a way to think about one's experiences and what one's seen and lived through. And so I was also really interested in that. And I took an online class from Don during the pandemic. And he was a fabulous teacher. And it was my first writing class that I had taken since college. So it was really helpful because legal writing is pretty different than this. So
yeah. Hi. So how did you feel after that day in San Francisco? Were you excited? Were you intimidated?
I was sort of intrigued at the idea of writing about my own community and seeing things that I see on a regular basis and realizing, I mean, as from a travel perspective, it's like, yeah, people actually want to come here and see things, and there is stuff that I could offer, again, just from my own backyard, which was helpful.
Sure. I would think that there would be an audience for your travels. I've noticed you travel a lot, and we'll get to that, but I've noticed that frequently when you do travel, it's to places with some sort of legal context. And so what drives your curiosity to go to other countries and look at those things?
Well, I had the opportunity and was really lucky that I made many presentations for work throughout the States and then internationally. I got involved with an international legal aid research group, and they were kind enough to invite me to speak at their conferences every year. So I started traveling for that. And, but also I find, I think you may be thinking too, when I went to, we took a cruise from Australia to Hawaii.
Oh, fun.
And yeah, it was really fun. But we got off in Fiji and, you spend a few hours looking at whatever it is one's supposed to see. But then I kind of wind up checking out the Supreme Court and talking to legal aid. And I had a wonderful time. I went to the Rape Crisis Center and talked to them about what they're doing. And so many of the issues are really very similar.
Yeah.
And
well, people are people.
People are people. Our legal systems are close enough. And that's certainly not true everywhere. And that's the other thing that's really interesting to me is how people structure things, how they think about things. And one of my passions is, I live in California. We're the richest state and the richest country in the world.
Right. And
we cannot provide attorneys for everybody.
Really?
Right. So yeah, we're way, the theory is it's about, 20% of the people get legal representation in civil cases. Not, I think we do a pretty decent job in criminal. But, so my work has been, how do you get people legal information? I mean, a lot of people now in our system, most people will have the opportunity to talk to a lawyer and get help with their paperwork. They don't necessarily need a lawyer in court. They're probably not even going to go to court. It's probably going to be done in the paperwork.
The two tracks then would be self representation pro per, or to hire a lawyer. I guess there's three if you are of sufficiently low income and the local legal aid has time for you,
right,
and has prioritized your issue. You can get help.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And what we have found is that in my practice, when I ran my agency, most of the people, we would do the paperwork and we would counsel them, but they would go into court. And if you have judges that are reasonably sympathetic and know the law, they're going to be fine.
Right.
Or everything would just be done on the paperwork. So we only had to get attorneys for people to actually provide representation. And a really limited number of cases.
Mhm.
So that's part of my hope is in other countries to be able to say there are other ways to try and resolve people's legal problems without necessarily trying to replicate a system that is not working.
Mhm. Let's talk a little bit about your travels in the last year. I've seen you in Brazil. I've seen you on the East Coast. Um, uh, Frank Lloyd Wright. You went and looked at that, but talk a little bit just in the last 12 months.
Okay. Gosh, I can't remember what I did at the beginning of this. I can go from January. So my nephew and his wife moved to England, and they had 2 cats and a dog. And so I went as a cat carrier,
a cat lady
for New Year's. Landed in France, took a pet taxi to the UK, and then we went to their home.
Wait, what is a pet taxi that would travel that far? Must have been outrageously expensive.
Yeah, I don't know. My niece-in-law was responsible, but you can't fly into England anymore. It's not EU and there are certain restrictions and whatever. So the question was, did we go to Ireland or did we go to France? And I left that all up to her. But so there were special taxis. This guy had a van that was set up for pets. And then there's a pet customs in Calais. And then we went in, it wasn't the Channel, but it was very much like that. And it's fascinating. You're in this van, and then all of a sudden it feels a little like you're moving, and then all of a sudden you're in England.
Interesting.
It's amazing. So I did that, but given I spent a few days in England, but then I knew that I wanted to be someplace a little warmer, and they were staying with her mom, and it was, I didn't want to overstay my welcome.
Right.
So I went on Skyscanner and sort of went, what's cheap and warm and where I haven't been and where I don't need a visa given my time. So I went to Tunisia.
Oh, that looked like such a fabulous trip.
So much fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, too, is that there are certain places in the world my husband has been, and he says, no, Tunisia, no, Turkey, no. But you went by yourself. You rented a car, and you went all over the place. I did. And you felt safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
I felt very safe.
Talk about the country and what you found there.
It's a beautiful country, and I focus on UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And it has, for example, the 3rd largest Roman Colosseum in the world.
Wow.
And it's incredible to walk through. And the old marketplace in Tunis and other areas and Carthage were really fun. But just it has incredibly old history, really old. And driving was easy. What I learned, there were cops everywhere. And so what I learned, people would kind of
military
flip their
or
lights.
State cops?
I'm not entirely sure, but they would sort of flip their lights, and I'd think, wait a minute, what am I doing wrong? And then I realized they were giving me a heads up that there was a traffic stop ahead. So but they were all fine. My only difficulty, I made a left turn following GPS. And the cop was right there and said, no, you weren't supposed to do that. And my French is fairly limited. And anyway, he just was, I was showing him the GPS and whatever. And he finally basically charged me a fine of $20. And I paid it, and we were done. There you are. Here's some cash. Thank you very much.
So I think my main kind of thought when I think of Tunisia is white and blue about the color of your shirt, and just bougainvilleas. And did you see a lot of that?
I saw a lot of that.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. The only challenge was the day that I was in the town that is all blue and white and amazing. It was quite rainy. So I didn't get to feel comfortable doing a lot of walking around. I did some driving around and enjoyed it, but it's amazing. And the old Medinas, and anyway, it was very fun.
So do you do pre-planning, or do you just go and then say, well, we'll see what hotels I can find?
That I did. What I actually think I figured out the towns I was going to. So I usually use a something like hotels.com because I figured they've got internet access. They have somebody who speaks English, and I can pay by credit card. So I have some security.
We will put a link to hotels.com in the comments. Hello.
Yeah, and it's because as a single person, I really want to make sure that if I get into trouble, I have some, there's somebody I can talk to or other kinds of things.
Do you put your information on file with the State Department when you get to a country?
Usually I do that. I don't think I got it together for that trip, but depending, yes, I think that's a good idea.
So you have blonde, beautiful hair. Did that create an issue for you at all?
I don't think so, primarily because I'm old. And no, I mean, they have a fair number of tourists because it's warm and on the Mediterranean. And so I think they're pretty used to it. And people were, lovely and respectful. I didn't have any, I didn't feel any discomfort with that. The challenge is when somebody wants to, show you their rugs or something like that. There were a lot of museums that turned out to be rug shops. And so it was great. I just was like, oh, I'm so sorry. My husband is, back at the hotel and I really have to dash. And he won't, I wish I could, but my mean husband won't let me do anything. Well, imaginary husband.
I'm not above falling back on things like that. I was in Doha, Qatar, and someone came into my hotel room in the middle of the night, and so I had to be very, very assertive. I mean, I didn't wake up, so this was after the fact with the hotel clerk, but the husband card works really well. So, Trace, where did you land? What are the main sites you saw, and where did you depart from?
Okay. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I left from Tunis, and but I flew in about an hour south. And so again, this is what's cheap. It was $64 for the flight, right? And then I had to fly back to Paris because we'd arranged for going back and forth through Paris. Just to make it easier on them. So I picked up a car and then drove south. I mean, basically along the water and then up. And I'm sorry, it's not cached in my memory. But
well, you have a lot of things in your memory.
There are 7 World Heritage sites in the country, and I was able to see 6 of them.
Wow.
So one was looks beautiful, but it was another 4 or 5 hour drive south, and then of course 4 or 5 back. And
what was your
just
favorite?
Didn't have enough time. Oh gosh, I think the Colosseum, because it was so extraordinary, to be, and then to be able to walk around because there's no foundation. It's really remarkable.
Interesting. So Tunisia. Where'd you go next?
I think the next one was the ice festival in
I saw that.
In Quebec. So I had thought about going to the ice festival in Harbin, but instead I've always wanted to stay in an ice hotel.
Harbin is in China. I would love to go to that.
Yeah, that looks amazing. Yes. But I had a conference in North Carolina, so what does one do but fly to Quebec on the way back? And that was the carnival. It's really fun. I highly recommend Quebec City. And in the wintertime, it's beautiful in the summer, but it was really special. So it was a fun, they had things like the tiki bar and these, it was like a Christmas tree and then kind of a little fern. Clearly a combination of alcohol and playthings for kids. So you could you go have a good time.
Right.
And we're gonna visit. And it was a way for people to get outside in the middle of the winter. Anyway, so that was fun. And when I was in Quebec City, I stayed in a former nunnery convent from the 1600s. Yeah. So really beautiful that's been restored, and that was special. And then stayed in the ice hotel overnight. So I was proud of myself.
Was that
worked out.
cold?
It was cold, but the good news is this last year, starting in July, I started swimming in the San Francisco Bay every morning.
Oh, yes, that.
So I'm much better about cold. And yeah, it's a thing you rent. They actually rent you 2 rooms, one in the ice hotel and then one in the adjacent regular hotel, which I thought was sort of ridiculous when I made the reservation. But I learned that was not the worst thing in the world because you can take a shower and be dry and then go out and be in the ice hotel and vice versa. And some people just were not comfortable spending the entire night in the ice hotel because you're in a pretty tight sleeping bag. So I think that could be a thing. And if you had to get up in the middle of the night, that could be an issue. I mean, I get it. This wasn't for everybody, but I had a great time.
What was your favorite meal that you had with Quebec?
Meal? Oh my gosh. Honestly, it was just having a Quebec. It was alcohol. It was Canadian Libra.
What is that?
Oh, it was like a Cuba Libra, but with maple syrup. I mean, it was just fun. It was more than anything. It was just fun.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Next, where'd you go next?
Oh, I think then we took our next thing I can think of is we took our trip from Australia to Hawaii. So we were on a cruise ship and left from Sydney, and we were supposed to stop in New Caledonia and Vanuatu, but combination of weather problems and a medical emergency on the boat, we couldn't do that. I've been to Vanuatu before, so that wasn't a huge loss, but we did get to stop in Fiji and Samoa and American Samoa and then Honolulu.
And what was the cruise line?
Celebrity.
And
it was fun. Yeah. And I will, one thing I did, was able to do, get internet access. And so that made it really much easier, both I had a consulting job that I was able to work on. I was able to attend my board meetings, do notes, all that kind of stuff. So that made it easier then.
So you are retired,
I'm
correct?
retired.
And so you're not just on vacation with a lot of comp time. So to Hawaii, what island did you go to?
We ended on Oahu.
Okay.
Yeah. And one of my quests that I'm pretty much completed is going to every presidential home, birthplace, library, anything I can find. So I had never seen where Obama was born or went to school, I think like that. I saw where he went to school in Jakarta, but not Honolulu. So that was fun. We did that, and Pearl Harbor and Mission Homes and the Iolani Palace, and of course the Supreme Court. I mean, I've been to the Supreme Court before, but
So then you came home, and what was next?
Then went to Brazil.
And let me clarify, this is since January of 2024.
Right.
Proceed, please.
Yeah. Well, I also had a 2-week trip to Texas for a consulting job. So
well, you can tell us about that.
Okay, yes. So that was in March. And so, just driving Texas in the springtime was quite lovely. Beautiful flowers, the blue bonnets and things like that.
So you were in the hill country.
Yes.
Yes. Austin? To the capital.
And Houston area combination.
Austin is a great city. Yeah.
Very fun.
Did you spend much time there?
I spent a week, actually a week and a half, because I came back. We were, I was with a colleague, and we were looking at legal information kiosks in Texas. So it involved driving around and finding out about rural communities and what's happening in terms of the legal world.
Yeah.
So but the next big trip was probably Brazil.
Okay. So, I want to hear about
You want to hear about Brazil?
So I've been to Rio. I've been to Belo Horizonte. That's it in all of Brazil.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had been to Iguazu Falls, which I loved. and Rio and Petropolis, so that southern part. And I have wanted to go to Manaus Opera House for as long as I can remember. I'm not entirely sure why, but the idea of a beautiful opera house in the middle of the Amazon, very appealing. So, I think I came back from the cruise and went, well, what do I want to do? And I also really wanted to see Salvador because it was the destination or the initial port for many enslaved people who had come from Ouida in Western Africa. So, and when I was in Ouida, it was sort of understanding the slave trade in a whole nother way. I was like, oh yeah, the Portuguese went here, and the British went here, and the French went here, and the Dutch went. No. I hadn't thought of it in that sense. So I really wanted to sort of see the city, see that culture, and then Brasilia. So I do have an interest in architecture. So Brasilia is a planned city that was designed by Oscar Niemeyer in the 50s. And so those were my main spots. And then, of course, researching, I was like, oh, there are 2 new museums in Rio I've never been to that I had to go to. And for some reason, I was looking at Belém or Belém and at the mouth of the Amazon. And then I was like, well, I've never been to Sao Paulo, and I probably should go to Sao Paulo, even though
you're close.
You're close. And it's like, gosh, I've always been afraid of a city of 24 million people. But so I just had a day there. So yes, I did that travel, and I did it in 10 days. So
oh my gosh,
it was a lot of 2 a.m. flights.
Wow.
I have to admit, coming back, I was like, oh.
Wow.
But it was fun.
Well, the thing that surprised me about Brazil is the distances from, for example, Rio to Belo Horizonte. We went by bus. I could only wish that we had gone in an airplane. It took us 5 or 6 hours. Wow. But we were able to see a lot of the country that way. Right. I found that the Brazilian people are not as proficient in the English language as other countries. You too?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. The real beauty for me was I speak Spanish, and so I could speak Spanish, and they would speak Portuguese, and some of the words were enough alike. We could sort of understand each other. Right. Do you speak Spanish?
I speak a little bit of Spanish. I just find the Portuguese pronunciation, so different.
It is.
So different. And I thought, oh, I don't know how to say that. And they would have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
But in museums and things like that, reading, having Spanish is really helpful because it's very similar. And yes, I mean, this is the first trip I've gone on where I really used a translation program a lot.
Oh.
And people were really comfortable with Google Translate, and we were able to go back and forth, and with taxi drivers and other folks. It was incredibly helpful, The other thing that's so wonderful about travel now for me is the GPS. So good.
Helpful.
Like, oh, I want to take a bus. Okay. And here I am in Sao Paulo, and bus comes right when my phone says the bus
the right number.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's stunning.
Yeah.
It's stunning how much easier it is to travel. And so many more places take credit, which again makes it a lot easier. So I thought it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, so, okay, we're in August.
Right.
That was your most recent trip. What do you have planned for the rest of the year?
Well, I have a conference in Canada. Oh, Detroit. I had another trip in May where I had a conference in Detroit, and then I decided to swim in all 5 Great Lakes since I've started this swimming thing. So that was pretty fun in one day.
We'll talk about the swimming thing. We just sort of brushed over it, but you guys, this woman is badass, and she swims in San Francisco Bay every single day of the week.
7 a.m.
Why?
It's what one does when one is retired, right? There's a wonderful group of women. Let's start with that. yeah, I would never have thought of it. I've lived here all these years, but it turns out to be refreshing. And there's sort of a dopamine hit, I think, through the day. Yeah, and it's yes. So it seemed like, well, if I'm in Detroit, why don't I? Maybe there's a Great Lake I can swim in. I did swim in Michigan last fall, Lake Michigan, and so I mapped out this trip from uh, um, Canada, from Ontario to the top of Michigan, near Mackinac Island. So wow. It was about 12 hours, maybe 14 hours of driving, and 5 lakes.
Wow. Well, so when you were a little girl growing up, first of all, where did you grow up?
Mostly in California.
Okay.
And I did live in Toronto for a year when I was 10. And then came back to lived here in the San Francisco Bay Area initially, and then I went to high school in San Diego.
Okay. And where'd you go to school?
To college?
Yeah.
UC Santa Cruz, Brown, and sort of miscellaneous credits other places. But basically, I graduated from UC Santa Cruz.
Oh, excellent. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm trying to make the transition from the Great Lakes to, that was the Detroit trip?
Mm-hmm. And I saw 5 Frank Lloyd Wright houses.
Wow.
That's a combination.
Wow.
So I have these quests that I set for myself that I wanted to be on all the continents by the time I was 50. I wanted to see all the states by the time I was 50.
When did you set that? How old were you?
I was in my late 40s.
Oh.
Yeah, I only got into this fairly late in life.
So was there a moment that precipitated that decision? Did you all of a sudden wake up and say, hey, I'm getting closer to death. Do I need to do this? I mean, what was the moment that you decided?
I think a combination. I think my husband dying. My husband died when I was 46.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom passed away a couple of years later. Mm-hmm. And that was one thing, is I never felt comfortable about leaving on holidays or things like that, because I knew I wouldn't have that much time with her. Mm-hmm. So I think that was, I took for my 50th birthday, I took myself around the world.
Oh, wow.
And that was huge. That was a big deal for me. Sure. And so I've done that 8 times since.
Well, I frequently mention, I love Confucius' saying that we all have 2 lives. The second one begins when we realize we only have one. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like that's what happened to you.
I think so.
Wow, that's great. So let's finish up where you're going to travel this year, and then we'll transition to. Okay. I really want people to hear from you why they should live differently and seize the day themselves. Okay. But let's finish up with 2024.
So I have a 1-week trip to Canada and the Buffalo area and things like that. Mm-hmm. And my boyfriend is an architect, and there are some beautiful Frank Lloyd Wright homes.
Oh, and a wonderful guy, Richard.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Uh-huh. So he has not seen them, and it's been a few years since I have, so I know they were in the process of doing a lot of work. So that seems like fun. And so, but then I'm gone for 2 months. So I am taking a trip. This is guided. Normally I travel by myself, but this is a guided trip to Africa. And we start in Marrakesh and then travel by Land Rover all the way down the coast.
Oh, how fun.
To end up in Benin, in Cotonou in Benin. So so it is fun. I have to get, it's 14 countries. Yeah. So I'm busy getting my visas right now.
So what are some spots that might be tricky to get through?
Well, when I was Western Sahara, when I was researching it a few years ago, the tour book was sort of like, well, it's great if you like war and undetonated and sand and undetonated mines. And I thought, because that time my quest was going to every country that ABC through Z, A through Z. And so I was looking for a W. And Western Sahara is not an official country, but it was an option. I wound up just saying, well, I've been to Wales, so we'll call it good.
There you go.
That, I think Mauritania, I mean, we'll see what the political situation is too.
Sure.
But my two places I really want to go to are Dakar and then Ghana to go to Accra. And, but it looks, Guinea-Bissau,
Yeah.
Ivory Coast, Liberia has always been interesting to me.
So there's not a lot of room in the Land Rover. So are you the only?
No. There are 12. I don't know. I think 60. I assume they have multiple Land Rovers.
Sure.
But it's a maximum 16 on the trip.
Wow.
So
How
it should be
fun.
Yeah. So that will be, I'll be back at the beginning of January.
Okay.
So so it's a fair amount of travel, but.
Well, so part of the reason that I do these podcasts is so that people who may have always wanted to do something, maybe they don't want to do like Bonnie does. You're
2 a.m. flights.
Oh my gosh. And you are really aggressively pursuing with all you have. Mm-hmm. But maybe they want to do something, I don't know, like Richard is now taking a quilt making class. Talk to that person and give them your best advice.
Well, I will talk about travel and say I think there's a huge variety in sort of building up your muscle. It's a little bit like exercise. I mean, this Brazilian trip, like I would have had to go to the gym for a while, right? Because I have practiced and travel a lot. I lost my passport in the course of the trip. I wasn't freaked out about. But I think that there's so much, just saying, well, let me go to San Francisco and just wander around and see what that's like and figure out what you actually like to do. I love museums. I love historical spots. There are plenty of people who do not. Yeah. They like to sit in a cafe. Awesome. Figure out what you like and just sort of get used to eating by yourself, having a cup of coffee, recognizing, there are always going to be things that happen. I've wound up in hospitals and thankfully nothing serious, but you just sort of, the thing for me at this age is I've had, various challenges and, I've lived to tell about them. And that's how I sort of feel like, oh, okay, this may be painful right now and I'll probably get through it. And I kind of love that. I don't think I had as much of that when I was younger. So, I only really started traveling in my 40s. And I think the trip around the world was my big, like, oh, I can do this. And I did the vast majority of my travel I did while I was working. And really? Yeah. And I was lucky that I worked for the state. So I had vacation time. Sure. And then most of this is done on frequent flyer miles. Yeah. So, all that kind of stuff. But I think, I do think it's sort of finding out what you want to do and just trying it. And that's okay.
Sure. Taking the safe little steps first before you build your way up to something more adventurous. Yeah.
And there are plenty of people, anyway, so that's my thought, because I guess the other thing I learned during the pandemic is I started doing walking tours in San Francisco. And there are all these places I've driven by, I've seen, I never knew, oh my gosh, that was built by some captain in 1865. How cool is that? So it was incredibly inspirational to do that. And then I started giving walking tours.
Did you? Oh my goodness.
So that's fun.
Have you always been an overachiever?
No. Oh, no, maybe. But anyway, but there's so many things I don't do in that way. But but I do think I'm a believer in lists. I'm a believer. I mean, it's sort of like establishing goals, and you can sort of figure out what you want to do. And,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so the reason I'm here with you today in your lovely home is that every year at the travel conference, there's a group of women that we particularly get along with well, who are doing similar things. Nobody's doing quite the same thing, but so you've opened up your home to us, and more people will be streaming in soon. But not all of us are traditional travel writers. We do have one friend, Lily, who is a travel journalist for Bloomberg. And we're all just kind of finding our niche and figuring out how to indulge our desire for doing it in the way that seems most meaningful to us. So I think that's one thing I really want to encourage you guys. We're not all alike, and each one of us looks into things that really interest us and do them. It doesn't mean that if we call them new boats, it doesn't mean that we're all going to try and get published in magazines or podcasts or anything. What we're trying to do is indulge ourselves in our passions and somehow find a way to tell those stories in a new way. So new boats. And that's what we're doing here.
Yeah. On our houseboat.
Oh, wow. How symbolic.
Yeah. Totally.
You're good. Okay. Well, thank you so much again. This has been really delightful.
Thank you.
I look forward to having the whole weekend together with you. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks.
Let me ask you one more thing, because I always ask people, is there anything we didn't cover that you really would like to cover?
Oh, I guess I will say my dad traveled a lot for his work. And I asked him at one point what he wanted to do when he retired. And he said, "Oh, I want to travel." And I was like, "Dad, I mean, he was an international vice president at that point. And so he traveled, and he said, "Well, it's just different, right, when you're working." And when I started traveling for work, I understood what he meant for the first time. And I have, done all kinds of things where I've done crazy, and trips that seem like they would be fun. And I'm sitting in a industrial, whatever, Hampton Inn in an industrial park for days on end. But by the time he retired, he was ill. And he lost money. And it was a fraud thing. And I think that was really helpful for me when I kind of really clicked on that, to say, take that time.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Yeah. Take that weekend, if you've got this opportunity. And I guess that was the other thing, is to realize if you're taking a trip, you don't have to spend a huge amount of time in a place. I mean, that's a wonderful thing and a wonderful way to travel. But a lot of times all I had was a weekend. I've gone to snorkel in the Great Barrier Reef over a 4-day weekend.
Wow. That's a long flight just to go snorkel.
I know. But I catch up on my movies. I mean, it's, sometimes, and again, partly it's like, oh, cheap airfare, I'll do it. But I mean, I think not feeling like you have to bank up a ton of money or a ton of time and just to try it, because the more, again, it's like exercise, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
And things will happen and go get through it. And as a result, I've been incredibly lucky with my travels.
And I feel incredibly lucky to know you and to be friends with you. I've appreciated your hospitality twice now, and I hope to appreciate it again, as well as entertain you in Idaho.
Yes, and meet your friend from Uganda.
Yes, September. I think the first week of September. So maybe you'll have to add that to your...
Apparently.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for listening. This has been Terry's Doing It. I'm talking with Bonnie Hough in Sausalito, and I'm going to try and switch this around as we get carried out. It might be too bright, but I want... Ooh. I'm getting used to the new piece of equipment, and I want you to see. How good is that? Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.